We're going to start, so if there's any people outside, if we get them in, we'll get going. Well, I'd like to welcome all of you to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Dave Rejeski, and I direct the Science and Technology Innovation Program and the Synthetic Biology Project. Everybody likes a poll, right? So I'm sure everybody's sort of wondering what we found out this year. This is the 5th year we've done this. We started out actually 5 years ago, and the reason we started to do this was we felt that it would be valuable to have a somewhat consistent longitudinal database that would allow us to actually compare results and data that we were finding. And there wasn't really anything out there like that. Obviously, the government was funding one-off studies and polls and focus groups, but we thought it would be very valuable to actually take a set of questions and repeat them every year. So those of you who have been here before, you'll see some questions that you've seen before, where we've just added this year's data onto those. And then generally what we do is every year we add 3 or 4 questions that are designed to give us a sense of how the public is feeling about particular policy options that might be sort of on the table in terms of oversight. And also we want to take a look at how people might feel about the use of this science in products that might show up on your table, on the shelves, somewhere in the marketplace. So last year we did a fairly deep drill down on synthetic biology use in biofuels. And this year we've picked 2 other products that we'll share with you. So Abigail Davenport is a senior vice president at Peter Hart Research, is going to take you through the results. The one thing I wanted to say is that we're going to try something we tried at one previous meeting. If there's people on the web that have questions, we would encourage you to email them in. Hopefully they'll show up on this computer and we can ask them during the Q&A session. So the address is just synbioproject at wilsoncenter.org. So synbioproject, one word, at wilsoncenter.org. So I'm going to turn it over to Abigail. She'll go through the results about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here again. We always enjoy the work we do with Dave and the folks here at the Wilson Center. As he said, this is the 5th time we've done this survey. It's the 3rd year where we've asked about synthetic biology. So most of the slides and questions we're going to cover relate to synthetic biology. We have one on nanotechnology as well. I think the overarching takeaway is awareness of both of those technologies continues to increase, and particularly with synthetic biology, awareness has nearly tripled in 3 years. But when it comes to synthetic biology, I think there's an optimism, but it's a cautious optimism among the public. Some indications of a desire for government oversight. There's not a desire to stand in the way of the progress, but there is a sense that it needs to be accompanied by research to better understand potential risks and side effects. So I'll take you through the key findings. I should just say is a survey of 1,000 adults nationwide with a margin of error of 3.1 percentage points. And we did it in mid-August. We conducted the survey. So in terms of, again, just sort of the one finding, since we've been tracking it for 5 years, we wanted to look at awareness of nanotechnology. And what you see is it's continued to increase. And today, 34% of Americans say they've heard a lot or some about nanotechnology. Also, only a third say they've not heard anything at all. And that is down at the lowest level that we've seen since we began asking this question 5 years ago. So there's a continued increase in awareness. And in terms of the groups that report the highest levels of awareness, and I should just state this is self-reported awareness. So these are what people think they know or think they've seen, and thus their recall. But in terms of the groups that indicate the greatest levels of awareness, it tends to be younger men under 50, college-educated individuals, and members of upper-income households. And this trend sort of continues also with synthetic biology, those being the groups that report the highest levels of awareness. You see with the red, the groups that are most likely to say they've heard little or nothing at all, women, those that are less educated, lower income, and African Americans, as well as If you look at by religion, those with no religious affiliation are the most likely to say they've heard something about it. And so getting to synthetic biology, this is a pretty marked change over 3 years. 1 in 4 today say they've heard a lot or some about synthetic biology. It's only 7% who say they've heard a lot. There's still a great proportion, a large proportion who haven't heard anything, 43%, but that's below half, and that is at the lowest level that we've seen over the past 3 years, so that we've gone from 9% to 26% who report hearing something about it, and from 67 to 43% who say they haven't heard anything at all. So definitely some movement in terms of self-reported awareness. And the patterns that we see, as I mentioned, in terms of the groups, the demographic groups that are most likely to report hearing something about it, we see the similar patterns in terms of men under 50, college graduates, upper income, and more educated. There's also, as probably would be expected, some overlap in awareness of these technologies, of these areas of research. So among those who say they've heard a lot about nanotechnology, 69% say they've heard a lot or some about synthetic biology. So there is a group of people who have heard about both, and if you've heard about one, you're more likely to have heard about the other. We want to understand, and we've asked this question in previous years, but we want to understand, what do people think synthetic biology is? So we asked them, regardless of whether you've heard about it or not, what do you think it is? And there are 29% of Americans who don't offer an opinion, but you have 7 in 10 who do. And what you find is people who have heard more about it, not surprisingly, offer more opinions or comments in terms of what they think it is. But even among those who say that they have not heard anything about it, it is a little over half, 54%, who offer some sort of comment. So we don't know to what extent these associations are based on things that they've heard. And in fact, since we know people haven't heard about synthetic technology, there are some inferences that people make from the terms or the words that are used. And we saw that when we did focus groups in previous years, when people talked about it, they can see the term synthetic biology and make some inferences. What comes up most often and is most volunteered in terms of their sense of what it involves, relate 30% saying something about it being man-made, artificial, fake, not natural, not real. So that's sort of a group of all those sorts of comments which are similar. 30% of Americans offering one of those types of comments. Another 12% saying it has something to do with genetic engineering or altering the biological makeup. And then some more general comments about it having to do with science. There is 6% who specifically mention cloning when asked what synthetic biology is. And we broke that out separately just so that you would see kind of top of mind that there is a small percentage there who does associate it with that. We also just wanted to understand, given the recent announcement, and I believe it was actually in May, not March, of the J.C. Ventnor Institute, we just want to understand what proportion of Americans say they recall hearing about that. 1 in 4, 24%, say they recall hearing about it. We explained it briefly as an announcement. They created a synthetic life form based on DNA created from scratch in the laboratory. There are some patterns that aren't exactly the same in terms of when we asked about the awareness of synthetic biology. There aren't as many notable differences by education or income. Men are more likely to say they've heard about it than women. And 57% of those who say they've heard a lot about synthetic biology recall hearing about this discovery and this announcement by the Ventnor Institute. So clearly overlap there, but some people who are saying they've heard about this that didn't say they'd heard about synthetic biology. Now, we wanted to get beyond just awareness, and this is a question we've asked before. We asked first their initial impressions of the risk-benefit trade-off of synthetic biology. So this is without any information, just trying to get a sense of how the public balances the risks and the benefits of synthetic biology. So asking whether they think the benefits will outweigh the risks will outweigh the benefits, or they will be about equal. You see that 32% aren't sure, and so they don't offer an opinion here. But among those who do offer an opinion about the risk-benefit trade-off, The plurality say the benefits and the risks will be about equal, and then the remainder are pretty closely divided in terms of the benefits will outweigh the risks, 19%, and the risks will outweigh the benefits, 16%. Familiarity with this topic or field of research does create a greater comfort level, as you see in the box below. Those who say they've heard a lot, 46% saying the benefits outweigh the risks. Those who say they've heard some, 31% benefits outweigh the risks. And then it's not that a lack of awareness translates into a skepticism or concern. It's just that people don't know and therefore either say, I don't know, I'm not sure, and don't offer an opinion, or they say that the risks and benefits are probably about equal. So higher levels of self-reported awareness translates into greater comfort level and more likely to say that the benefits outweigh the risks. A lack of familiarity does not mean people automatically gravitate toward risk, but they are just more in the middle. Since a lot of people haven't heard of it, and even those who have, it's likely they don't fully understand it or know exactly what synthetic biology involves. We essentially read to them a description of synthetic biology that not only talked about the potential benefits but also the potential risks. And the idea here is just to give them more information and then understand where their opinions are and see if there are shifts in terms of the attitudes regarding the risk-benefit trade-off. And what we do see is that while the plurality, 37%, say the risks and benefits are about equal, the proportion who say the risks will outweigh the benefits essentially doubles, goes from 16% to 33%, and the proportion who say the benefits will outweigh the risks goes from 19 to 26. So there's more movement towards the risk side of the equation upon gaining more information about synthetic biology. This is what we found last year as well, and it's sort of borne out in some of the other further results that we're going to get into. But clearly, getting more information and hearing more about both sides does generate concern among some. When we asked this question, which we did not this year, but when previously we've asked it about nanotechnology, we gave more information and then had an informed assessment of the risk-benefit trade-off. In that case, there was sort of equal movement towards risks and benefits, and it wasn't that there was a huge, it wasn't sort of as lopsided as it is with synthetic biology. That said, it's still important to note that the plurality here are saying that they're equal. The risks and benefits are equal. And in terms of looking at the subgroups, and I didn't get into it before, but when we talk about initial impression, so before they're given information, the same groups that report higher levels of awareness also are the groups that are more likely to say the benefits outweigh the risks. So younger men, college graduates, upper income. And even upon further information, you see that upper income and younger men continue to be among the groups who are most likely to say the benefits outweigh the risks. Those groups who move more towards risks are those who are less informed, particularly women over 50, those with some college education. And then on the chart here, we also look at racial differences as well as religious affiliation. Evangelicals are the subgroup with the largest proportion who say risks outweigh the benefits initially at 24%. So it's still not a high number, but it's the highest number of all the sort of demographic subgroups. And then upon hearing more information, 45% of evangelicals say that the risks outweigh the benefits. Those who have no religious affiliation are more positive or more optimistic initially, and also upon hearing more information about synthetic biology. So that gives you a sense of where people start, and with more information, where they move, if they do move. Turning a little bit now to attitudes towards agencies that could be involved in oversight or research agencies, and then kind of understanding what Dave was saying about specific applications and the way the public makes decisions when it comes to specific applications. So we wanted to track confidence in these 4 agencies. As you see, we've done this going back some years, 4 years for some and just a couple for the Department of Energy. But to understand the level of confidence that the public has that these agencies will maximize benefits and minimize risks when it comes to scientific and technological advancements that they are charged with overseeing. And, you know, there's been some movement here and there, but if you look at 2009 to 2010, so the past year, a slight drop for FDA, a slight increase for USDA, slight decrease for DOE. Those are all within the margin of error and not something that we really want to flag as particularly notable changes. But the EPA, the level of confidence, the proportion who say they have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence in the EPA when it comes to maximizing benefits and minimizing risks has gone from 59 to 51. And that is a notable drop. And the only really of the 4 that we tested that is worth noting. And with that drop, they are now have the lowest level of confidence of the 4 agencies that were tested. The drops in the EPA's level of confidence are sort of across the board, but most notable among women, among African Americans, and among non-college educated Americans. And we also do look at the results by party affiliation. And independents and Republicans, maybe not surprisingly, have lower levels of confidence than Democrats in each of these agencies. What I think is notable particularly is that when it comes to looking at federal agencies who could be involved in oversight, and it comes to the role, the confidence in businesses to maximize benefits and minimize risk in the areas where they are developing, have scientific and technological advancements, the public's level of confidence is lower when it comes to business. This is a trend that we've seen, and it continues. Today, 44% say they have a great deal or a fair amount of confidence, and that is compared to 53% who say they have just some or very little confidence. The proportion who say they have very little confidence in businesses when it comes to minimizing risk, maximizing benefits, is at the highest level we've seen in the past 4 years, which is 25% who have very little confidence. So while there has been some fluctuation, the EPA has shown some erosion in the EPA's confidence numbers. Each of the agencies generates a higher level of confidence than do businesses themselves when it comes to minimizing risks and maximizing benefits. So we wanted to look more at the public's, as I sort of mentioned, guarded optimism or cautious optimism. And so we first asked a 2-part question, which comes closer to their point of view. Should synthetic biology move forward, but more research must be done to study its possible effects on humans and the environment? Or should a ban be placed on synthetic biology until we better understand its implications? By 63 to 33, the public says, let's move forward, understanding the caveat that there will be continued research on possible effects on humans and the environment. The boxes at the bottom show that, as we've seen throughout, the more people have heard about it, the more optimistic they are, the more supportive they are in this case. 80% of those who've heard a lot say, let's move forward. Among those who've heard nothing about synthetic biology, 52% say move forward, but 44% support a ban. I think it is notable that, not surprisingly, the people who think the benefits outweigh the risks say let's move forward. The people who think the risks outweigh the benefits, 64% support a ban. But among those who think the risks and benefits are equal, by 72 to 24, they say that synthetic biology should move forward. So there is a notable proportion here, a third of the public, who says today, based on the information that they have, and a lot of that information is what we told them, since we know that these are people who tend to have heard less about it, that they favor a ban, and that is not, a group to ignore. But the plurality, the large majority of the public says, let's move forward cautiously. And in getting a sense of where the support for continuing comes from, you see, again, men, college-educated individuals, whites, and upper-income individuals, the most likely to say, let's move forward, continue to move forward. Those who report the highest support for a ban are the one group where the majority is African Americans. 52% say support a ban at this point until more is understood. But we also have less educated individuals, lower income, women, and 43% of evangelicals who support a ban. So there are some groups there among whom, or who are much more divided in terms of moving forward or banning this technology until this area of science until more is understood. We also want to understand, what's the role of government here? What are people's feelings about government regulation when it comes to synthetic biology? And by 52 to 36, the public supports regulation by the federal government, 36 instead of just voluntary guidelines. 36% support voluntary guidelines developed jointly by industry and government. And there is 12% who just aren't sure here. So the majority of the public saying that the government does have a role, federal regulatory agencies do have a role. We didn't get into which agencies those are, but there's clearly some support for involvement and oversight by the government. Those groups most supportive of government regulation are women, those with a high school education or less, low income, African Americans, and Hispanics. So, the groups that I continue to mention who are more optimistic and who are more guarded are consistent throughout the survey, no matter which of the questions we're looking at. And a lot of that relates to the fact those are also groups who report lower levels of awareness of synthetic biology. Those who think the risks and benefits are about equal in the informed question. So once we gave them more information and they said, I think the risks and benefits of synthetic biology are about equal, those people support government regulation over voluntary guidelines by 55% to 36%. So those who are more in the middle, still the majority supporting government regulation. It wouldn't be surprising that there are some partisan differences here. Democrats favor government regulation by 64 to 28. Independents by 49 to 37, and Republicans are fairly evenly divided, 42% government regulation, 44% voluntary guidelines. I think it is worth noting that 42% of Republicans are favoring government regulation as well. We also want to understand what are the public's top concerns about synthetic biology. And what we did was we provided them with 4 concerns that have been raised about this area of research. And we asked them which one concerns them most. And as you see, there is no single concern that really rises to the top and is much more significant than the others. 27% expressed concern about it being used to create harmful things like biological weapons. 25% saying it's morally wrong to create artificial life. And then 23% concerned about the negative health effects for humans. A lesser proportion, 13%, select concern about damaging the environment. Those who say that upon hearing more, the risks outweigh the benefits, rank moral concerns as their top criticism or their top concern here about synthetic biology. So those who are the most skeptical and concerned, their top concern is the moral concern about creating artificial life. It's also the top concern of evangelicals and those who support a ban, 44% selecting the moral implications as their top concern. As Dave mentioned, we asked about 2 different applications for synthetic biology. And what we find is that the public really makes different value judgments depending on the application. And we first asked about a potential application to create a flu vaccine, a more accelerated process for creating a flu vaccine. And by 59 to 34, the public said, I think of this as more of a positive development that I would be hopeful about versus a negative development that concerns me. And there are many groups among whom a majority say they are hopeful and think it's a positive development. Those who are most likely to see it as a negative development and have majorities who feel that way are those who support a ban, those who think the risks outweigh the benefits. Again, not surprising. African Americans, 57%, saying that they see it as a negative development. And those who cite moral concerns as their main concern about synthetic biology, 54% of them see it as a negative development. So overall, this is, the majority of the public saying this is a positive thing, and I feel hopeful about this. And what we see is that when we ask them about a different application, we see a very different result, indicating that there really is, it's almost a case-by-case basis, and how the public evaluates and makes a decision about the risk-benefit trade-off. Because we also ask them about using synthetic biology to accelerate the growth of livestock, specifically cows and pigs. And for this potential application, 74% see it as a negative development that concerns them. Among the people who were positive about the flu vaccine, only 33% of them are positive about the application to accelerate the growth of livestock. So clearly, the public really takes a different view of these two different applications. And it sort of just indicates it reinforces, I think, the cautious nature and the way that the public is approaching and evaluating synthetic biology. They seem to be thoughtful about it and seem to really be taking it on a case-by-case basis. And so to the extent that they are learning about synthetic biology and getting more information about it, it really will depend. Different applications may generate different levels of support or of concern. I just wanted to give you a sense of looking at these two applications by people's evaluation of the risk-benefit trade-off. So those who think the benefits outweigh the risks, not surprisingly, 85% of them think that the flu vaccine is a positive development. But among that same group, the majority actually think that using it to accelerate the growth of livestock is a negative development. So that's those people who are most positive, most optimistic about synthetic biology. Those who say the risks and benefits are about equal, by 65 to 29, are positive about the flu vaccine application. But you see it's a huge flip when it comes to the other, 20% favoring the livestock application and 75% opposed, et cetera. I think it's kind of what you would think, except the first group, those who think the benefits outweigh the risks, they, having a majority who oppose the livestock application, I think is something worth noting. And for the last slide, we just wanted to look at, we have these 4 different concerns that we provided to respondents, and we asked them to select the one that bothered them most when it comes to synthetic biology. And what you see is those who say are concerned about human health effects, they think the flu vaccine is a positive development, 65 to 31. Those who are concerned about the environment think that the flu vaccine is positive by 64 to 32. Those who are concerned about biological weapons by 62 to 30. But those who are concerned about the moral implications of creating artificial life, by 54 to 39, they think that the flu vaccine application is actually a negative development and something that would concern them. So that group sort of consistently more concerned, more likely to be on the side of risk than benefit. And even on this application where most subgroups, majorities of most subgroups are positive, see it as a positive development, this is something about which the majority of them see as a negative development.
Okay, we've got plenty of time for questions, actually. So just raise your hand. Do we have mics? Yeah. Raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone because we're webcasting this. Just tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Travis Steelman with the Consortium for Science Policy and Outcomes. I was curious about the figure you said. It was like 24% of people were familiar with the J. Craig Venture announcement that was made in May. To me, that seems surprisingly high. I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that. I wouldn't have expected it to be so high, but
it is perhaps higher than we would have expected. I think there is some element of people who like to say they've heard of something even if they haven't. But that wouldn't explain a 24% number. But it was in the news and carried in fairly prominent publications. But that doesn't mean that if we ask them in any detail about it that they would really be able to give us. So it's really more the snapshot. I think I've heard something about that, but it doesn't mean they really have an informed level of awareness. But I understand it is perhaps higher than people would expect, but I don't have an explanation for that.
Henry Hedker, researcher at NARA. We had the recent Gulf disaster with oil, and I wondered, what I've heard is that they're going to use bacteria to try to eat up some of the oil that's in the waters. We had this giant ship introduced, which was supposed to cleanse the sea of oil, and somehow it was declared ineffective, and it might have been quite expensive to use its services, and that was eliminated. They just stuck with the smaller vessels to try to pick up the oil. And I wondered any role, other than what I mentioned for synthetic biology in this, solution that's been, proposed to try to cleanse the waters.
Yeah, certainly that's gotten a lot of attention in terms of future applications. We haven't tested that one, but it certainly would be an interesting one to get public opinion about in terms of risk and benefit trade-offs. It also is one, I think that one of the areas where you see more public concern is when there's open applications where there's release. So this would be an interesting one to test because obviously it would be massively released into an ecosystem. So I think we'll have to think about that one for next year. The Gulf did. I mean, one of the interesting things in terms of the trust in agencies, we were kind of searching for some explanation of what happened to EPA. I think EPA was very visible in the oil spill. People saw that quite often as an environmental disaster. So what we found over time is quite often these oscillations in trust in agencies is very, very tied to kind of the issue attention cycle. So if there's some flare-up with some drug, it's reflected in the trust of the FDA. If there's something going on that's related to the environment, the EPA's trust goes down. So I think that's the other thing that I would caution us about in terms of the issue of trust in government is quite often it's very, very linked to whatever happens to be in the news when we're doing the focus groups or we're doing the polling.
I mean, it really did come on the heels of the oil spill, and I certainly we agree that if you in a year or even 6 months you could find a different level of confidence and that things had sort of leveled out again. So
Jim Sang, retired. Does your data give you any indication about how comfortable your respondents are with their opinions? And also, do you have any idea of what percentage of them actually follows these issues actively versus remembering that they saw something on the 6 o'clock news?
I don't really know. I have an answer to your second question. I think that the fact that about a third of the people, when we initially asked about risk versus benefits, said, I don't know, that there's a level of honesty there of people who, if I haven't heard much, how can I have a view on the risks and benefits? So, yes, people, there is a desire to say, you've heard of something, but I feel that these results indicate the public really was being honest, and those who didn't have an opinion said so. And I think a lot of those who say the risks benefits are equal, it doesn't mean they don't have an opinion, but they are still taking a more wait-and-see approach. There's nothing that's swaying them one way or the other at this point. Granted, they may have limited information, but based on the information they have, that's the analysis they make.
I think some of this also ties to what we know about science literacy. So it's not surprising that quite often a lot more people who have heard about this that are college educated. There was a recent study that came out of Arizona State, I think, that indicated, this was about nanotech, but probably 4 out of 10 adult Americans in the U.S. have visited a science museum in the last year. And if we look at non-college educated, it drops about 1 in 10. So I think sometimes there's this correlation here between just how exposed people are to science messages through various media, whether it's at science museums or watching PBS channels, and level of education, income, which are cross-correlated. So there's that, I think, is going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you. Judy Chambers with the International Food Policy Research Institute. I have 2 questions, actually. The first one relates to what you were just talking about with respect to government agencies. And similar to EPA, can you describe the precipitous drop with USDA from 2006 to 2007? Was there something that was particularly linked to? That's past data, of course. And then the second question is, in terms of the 2 case examples that you chose, what was your thinking behind picking those 2 particular examples? Because to me, coming at it from the perspective of the debate around genetic engineering, those are sort of the polar opposites, medicine versus food, and I'm wondering if it would have been more instructive, or perhaps you could include a 3rd category for the future, to look at a food product that isn't targeted towards farmer productivity but has more relationship to some particular consumer benefit that is nothing to do with how fast or something a farmer can produce.
In terms of the USDA, I don't recall the 2006 what occurred in 2007 in terms of specific news events. But I can go back and look in that. But that was more recent, I believe. I mean, I feel like there have been several, unfortunately, issues, some getting more coverage than others, and I don't recall what that was in 2007. But it has held pretty constant since then.
In terms of the choice of case studies, the vaccine was chosen because it was something that was publicly discussed in a congressional hearing. It was mentioned by Craig Ventnor. It was also mentioned by Anthony Fauci from NIH. So I felt this is a real one. The food one came out of a set of scenarios that was developed by the Ventnor Institute. It's looking at various possible scenarios. As you know, the food one is essentially happening right now. I mean, the FDA is evaluating an Atlantic salmon that's been genetically modified to double or triple its growth rate. So it's not being done with synthetic biology, but it's a hot item. It's actually going through evaluation, and there's a lot of debate about this, especially among ecologists. We have done when we looked at nanotech. We did focus groups, and we did actually national polling about nano being applied, for instance, to food packaging, where it could have been used as an antimicrobial. There were a lot of positive benefits. We found much greater acceptance of nanotech in food packaging than actually in food. I mean, there's something about proximity to your mouth, I think, that gets people more nervous. If I remember, I think the concerns almost doubled, actually, when the nanotech went into the food versus having some kind of beneficial value in packaging. So, yeah, Jerry?
Jerry Epstein at the Center for Science, Technology, and Security Policy at the AAAS. 2 things, one methodological and a comment. If everything you know about a technology is based on a couple paragraphs you read, it must be exquisite, or I'm wondering if it's exquisitely sensitive to exactly how that's worded. And have there been case studies in other cases where you have slightly different descriptions of the topic, and then do the answers change depending on happy to glad in that description?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you that the information you provide has a direct impact on the informed perceptions. We really worked with Dave and his colleagues to come up with something that would be balanced, and with also within the constraints of a survey where, we can't read something that would take 5 minutes because people would lose focus and probably hang up the phone. I think we really tried to provide, we wanted to get initial impressions, initial self-reported awareness, and then with a limited amount of information, but covering both sides of the risks and the benefits, understanding here that these are all potential, there's so much that isn't known yet, and sort of couching it that way. We felt, we tried to do an honest job in kind of essentially what if a reporter had a short bit of time to give kind of both sides and a brief description. I don't know that there are other questions that are asked where there's, an informed perception. Are there?
Well, I'd say two things about the method. I think you also flip the information,
yeah, we
right?
do. Yeah, we flip.
People are sometimes sensitive to whether they hear the risks first or the benefits. So as the poll's being taken, those things are constantly flipped. In reality, a lot of times that's all people ever read in the newspaper. All they're getting is snippets. There's a fair amount of consistency between the findings we've had and the findings that have emerged out of the Cultural Cognition Project up at Yale. It's studied nanotech for about 4 years. We work closely with them, and they've done a lot of similar questioning, or beginning to do it on synthetic biology. They use a web-based system rather than a telephone system, which allows you to provide the information, more information for longer periods of time. But the patterns that you're seeing, this kind of general kind of nervousness amongst particular subpopulations, women's, African Americans, was something they found also. So I think there is some kind of sort of convergence validation between this study, which was done by phone, and web-based surveys.
In fact, I'm really intrigued by the vaccine case, because I don't think very many people think faster vaccine is inherently a bad thing. So something else about it is what they're reacting to. But could it be the use of a computer to design it? Could it be the biological processing? Do people think they're being injected with a living organism? Do you have any way of parsing out what it was about synthetic biology in the vaccine case that was the source of the discontent?
Unfortunately, we don't. Given, we had a limited amount of time, and also focus groups often kind of provide the opportunity to get under the surface and see kind of what's the nexus of concerns. And since we didn't do those, we don't have that kind of more qualitative component here. So it would completely be speculation for me to say what was driving that.
Normally, when we have run these in the past, we tend to do focus groups and surveys. So quite often we do have a little bit better sense of what people are thinking, because we can drill down with them. This year we didn't do the focus groups. Yep.
Noela Invernizzi, recently appointed as a fellow here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Well, I have a comment and a question. The first is about the question about moving forward or banning synthetic biology. And I think that it is a quite polarized question, particularly if you cross this one with the other. I don't remember exactly the question, but the options were voluntary guidelines or enforced regulation. And a lot of people said that voluntary guidelines would be fine. So maybe these people would support a third option, that is move forward, period. So maybe three options in this question, which has a lot of policy implications, would be better than two options. The other is a question about the African American position, mostly contrary to synthetic biology. In your opinion, this is due to the levels of education, religion, or maybe the past experience of African Americans with some aspects of science and technology in this country?
I would say the first two, yes, level of education and religiosity are factors. But from this survey, I don't think that I could I could say, the past experience. That certainly occurred to me as I was looking at the data, but that's more of a guess on my part than data which would specifically link that concern to their skepticism or caution regarding synthetic biology.
I'm Pascal Pasquale from the untrustworthy EPA. You had some slides that touched on this, but I guess I had trouble gleaning the patterns. So I'm interested in the shift in the perception between benefits and risk from the initial view versus the informed view, or the initial understanding, the informed understanding. And of the attributes that you've looked at, party affiliation, religion, gender, education, do you have a sense of what the most predictive variable would be, and in what direction? You've touched on it, but if you could just summarize.
The groups that move more toward risk. So, for instance, evangelicals were already the group most concerned about the risks, but yet they almost double in terms of thinking risks outweigh benefits. But other groups who are more unsure either don't have an opinion or think that the risks and benefits are about equal, and then show greater movement toward risk, are women, especially older women, and those who don't have a college education. So less education and gender seem to be the indications of moving more towards risks. And those are audiences or groups who report among the lowest levels of awareness of synthetic biology, self-reported awareness.
Yeah, there's a long history in risk perception studies of what they call the white male effect. So it doesn't matter. We could talk about 20 different risks, and people have studied this, whether it's radioactive waste disposal, whether it's toxins, whether it's biology. There tends to be a much greater sort of comfort with risks among young white males, which probably is not surprising for those of you who used to be a young white male or have observed them. But it's a fairly well-known. It's not something that's unique to nano or synthetic biology. So people have looked at all kinds of various risks in society.
And we also find that men always, I can't say it, but pretty consistently report higher levels of awareness of anything. So.
Yeah, right here.
Bob McCrate, George Washington University. I know this is not meant as a criticism of your research in any way, but I know there are certain inherent limitations when you do survey research and, trying to find the perfectly worded question. So what I'm just asking about are three things that sort of intrigued me when I looked at this. The first one was, do you think it's significant that people answering the survey could make a distinction between nanobiotech and synthetic biology? And is that a distinction that would have any impact on the responses they would give, or is it just sort of lost in the cloud of two terms that people don't understand? So that was one question. Another one had to do with the discussion of the vaccine issue with the animal growth. Again, going back to Jerry's point, there is some interesting possible ramifications of live vaccine with synthetic biology that we don't want to get into, but I think the question is that a legitimate area for people to really weigh what, when they see vaccine, they think, oh, this is going to be something good, salutary, beneficial to the public, and so on. They may not be able to see that there are any risks inherent in vaccine development that may involve this as well. In other words, they tend to associate positive things with public health activities that are designed to, protect the public. So that's not meant as a criticism, just a question whether you think that may be biased at results. And I guess the other thing is when you talk, there's a section in there where you talk about people being concerned about the examination of possible effects on humans and the environment. Again, this is partly based on my own previous experience with genetically modified organisms. I was astounded myself to discover that most of the people involved in doing GMO research were working for companies who didn't care about the effect on humans and environment. Their concern was for product development and breakthroughs. And I'm wondering if that subtlety is somehow in that issue as well, in the sense that when people say, yeah, I would like them to take more precautions to look at humans and environmental effects, but it doesn't answer the other part of the question, which is who does that? Okay. So, again, not a criticism.
Sure. No, I appreciate your... I think in terms of the differing levels of awareness, nanotechnology, there's a product that is, the nano. It is a term that I think is, Dave can correct me, but used more even in the consumer marketplace. So I'm not surprised that there would be a higher level of awareness there than of synthetic biology. So in terms of answering that question, I think, it's reasonable to think that there could be, some who've heard of one and not the other, and that they're not necessarily conflating the two. In terms of the vaccine versus the animal, this really it was meant to get sort of a snapshot here, rather than exploring any one application in great detail. So I don't want to suggest that we did lay out all the possible negatives and all the potential benefits. That said, I think in this research and other research we've done, and Dave mentioned the nanotech use in food packaging versus in food, and then other research we do that may not even be about food, but the closer it is to you as a person, the more concerned you are. And, vaccines may be something that a lot of people have, in the influenza vaccine specifically. But, when they're talking about food that they're putting in their body, that it seems to just generate a level of thought and critique that I think you don't get in other areas. It's also harder, as you say. A vaccine does have a positive connotation, and it also involves sort of a level of science that probably the average public isn't quite understanding of. So you're kind of going on your touch points, what you know, and that may be quite limited. But this is meant more to give a snapshot in if there are these two different applications. We didn't have the ability to sort of in great detail dissect them. But what is the initial reaction here? Because as Dave says, people don't read that much, and they make judgments, and they make decisions about risks and benefits, whether something is or is not a good idea. So what they're hearing, even that little snapshot, can really have an impact. And this was, I think, meant, Dave, you can elaborate if I'm wrong, but to kind of give that initial snapshot perception from among the public. And then in terms of the concerns that we offered, I think that you're right on in terms of who should be addressing those concerns, who should be responsible for helping to manage the risk-benefit trade-off. And, I think the data shows that the public has greater confidence in federal regulatory agencies. It doesn't mean that they don't see a role for business and that there is zero trust. That's not the case. There is a level of confidence. But I think the data would indicate that sort of everyone has a role, and that, just business alone is a concern for a large proportion of the public, not everyone. And despite some shifts in confidence of regulatory agencies, the public does see a role for them to be playing when it comes to this area of science.
Yep, right here.
Samar Chatterjee from Safe Foundation. Having been associated with EPA for quite some time, and I have a question on your, you showed that 2010, the level of confidence in EPA lowered quite a bit. Now, I would think 2009 ended the Bush-Cheney 8 years, and during that time, the confidence, general confidence in EPA was, in my opinion, much lower than it should have been. So, having looked at that, my question was, did you check what percentage of your sample was Republican? Because you did mention Republican, Democrat responses and so on. So what percentage was it? Was it adjusted for the national balance?
Yes, it was. It reflects.
And so
this is not an overly conservative or Republican sample that we have.
So your explanation was that it was because of the BP oil spill that EPA got a bum rap, even though EPA was not really managing that. It was the Coast Guard and the White House that had the real upper hand in those decisions. EPA was only taking samples and reporting those numbers, and most of the decision to implement things were coming from Coast Guard and the White House.
I mean, I think EPA, BP, the administration, everyone knows that the prism through which the public gets the information and what they hear is not always what exactly is going on. And obviously that event generated a level of coverage unlike most. Hurricane Katrina is probably I'm just basing this on my own recollection, but the things that really stand out and that people are following on a day-to-day basis, and with the camera under the sea, and it is the Environmental Protection Agency. The public doesn't necessarily know what its responsibilities are explicitly, and so I think without having asked explicitly, why do you have a lower level of confidence, or, has anything recently affected your level of confidence in the EPA? The best guess I have is that, it was linked, fairly or not, to what happened in the Gulf. So.
Yeah, we could do, I think, one more question right there.
I'm just curious to know your thoughts on how the government's efforts to increase transparency in terms of regulatory actions might impact this, like public perception.
Well, we know last year, and I don't have the data right in front of me, but we asked, how important is it important for more information for there to be essentially greater transparency. And, it was virtually everyone. People want to know more. They want more information. It doesn't mean they're going to read it all, and it doesn't mean they're going to understand it all. But I think transparency is something that the public's looking for in all aspects of life, commerce, and government. And so to the degree there is, in an understandable way, doesn't mean volume necessarily of information, but clarity for a, layman like me and the other general public out there. Last year we did find that people were sort of anxious for more information.
I asked because of the slide where you showed that people became more toward the risk side of the equation when they got the information. So it was the women being everything, child-based.
Yep.
I guess my concern is that,
for instance, with the Gulf oil, there's a whole lot that goes into it, the decisions, and a lot of times the scientists have a hard time coming up with what is in fact the best way to move forward. And the bottom line is there are no easy answers, and you give folks a little bit of information which allows them to see things from one vantage point, and even if you give them a lot, as you said, oftentimes they don't read all of it. My concern is that the trust is going to fall dramatically as more of the information becomes available, because you need to take it in context. I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into it, and it's just something that I'm very concerned about, especially in terms of what we're dealing with now in the Gulf. I think that EPA in particular is going to come under heavy scrutiny that they probably don't deserve, because I know a lot of people have put a lot of effort into trying to move forward the best way possible. But there's just, like I said, no easy answers. So,
I don't think there are easy answers, but information is going to come out, and as Dave said, the two scenarios we talked about are things that are in the news already. Now it's a slightly different scenario for the accelerating growth of a living organism, but people are going to hear things, and so it seems hard to stop that. But the more that they're hearing that in conjunction with the focus on managing the risks and maximizing the benefits, and this survey would suggest that government and business are working together, and that everyone has a role to play. It would seem to me that would be a more favorable scenario than whatever trickles out, and people sort of make their own judgments. I mean, they're still going to make their own judgments, but they're going to be less informed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we have a few minutes we can hang around, I guess, if people have any questions. And the report's up on the website. You can download it, and stay tuned. If you've got any interesting things you want us to test next year, send them in.